Great. Well, hey, thanks, Joe. It's great to be back in the area. As Joe mentioned, it wasn't too long ago, really, when I was just here as across the street as an undergrad at Rice. For the next kind of 30, 40 minutes, I'll just kind of share some perspectives in terms of how things are changing for clinical trials and how it's an important time for us to do so, especially if you want to tackle the most vexing cardiovascular health problems. So let's see. All right, I think we're good. Let's see. Okay, all right, here's my disclosures. And so I do have one other set of disclosures, which I was a little afraid because of the history I have with Joe is that Joe could go sleuthing and discover pictures from my past days. And so like anything in cardiovascular health, like prevention is always the best practice. And so I went ahead and also the second thing is when I share with my father that I was coming back to the area, he got super excited and started going through his archives and sending pictures to me. And so like I was selective here so that there wasn't anything terribly embarrassing about my past days. But on the left is from when I was a little kid in Port Arthur, Texas, so 90 miles away from here. And then on the right is just yesterday when I graduated from Rice. Nothing much has changed over the last few decades. So just kind of breaking things down here in terms of why we have to change things differently in terms of doing clinical trials in the cardiovascular space is just to put some things together in terms of what's the problem we're aiming to solve, what are practical approaches, give some case examples, and then also share what's coming up left to do. Along the way, I'm going to try to make sure I hit the MOC questions because I know like there's so many people who are really enthusiastic about the ABIM and getting their MOC credit like I am. So I did take a look at the questions that I had apparently submitted a while ago and realized that there's one that I need to make sure to cover that's not in the slides. But the first kind of question, which is on the test, is have you or someone you love age faster or slower? And what I mean by that, if you were to think about, just 5 years ago and ask the question, or imagine, someone came up to you and said like, hey, by the way, we're just going to skip Saturdays. Like we're changing the rules like every 2 months, we're just going to make a Saturday go away. Is that possible? And it turns out that that may be possible, unfortunately. And so people, in a way, are aging faster. And why that's the case is that if you look at the annual report from the CDC, there's unfortunately been declining life expectancy in the US. And we're almost down 3 years. And it's as if like one day a month just vanished. You went from Friday night and you woke up Sunday. That does not seem like a great thing. And so, life expectancy has declined, which is surprising, especially with the resources the U.S. has. Now, one reason I think everyone sees is because of COVID. Another reason has been around the opioid crisis. But unfortunately, cardiovascular health has also declined. If you look around the country, risk factors have actually gone the wrong way, not the right way. And at least when I was living in the area before, there were a few patients who were obese. And imagine, Joe, all that's changed now. But if you look across the U.S. and just ask the question, how many counties, how many regions had obesity prevalence over 35% for their county. And 10 years ago was 0. Now it's over 20 states that have that problem. So obesity has really grown, literally, so no pun intended, and all the other problems with it in terms of metabolic issues. And so, and then certainly COVID has caused a lot of disruptions in terms of access to healthcare that we're still recovering from. But these trends actually started before COVID. we are having problems in terms of risk factors getting worse across the country, and also cardiovascular health getting worse. And it turns out around the world in different regions, that's also been the case. And so while there's been so much attention around cancer, still unfortunately cardiovascular disease is the #1 health problem in the US and in the world. And so there's a need to bend the curve back. Now, there's also a lot of attention in terms of cost of care. And so unfortunately, we lead in the US in this issue in terms of health spending per capita. And so if you're asked a question, 4 trillion and change, could we do something better? The answer is probably yes. I know you all are trying to do that directly here. But one thing is, how do you actually speed up the research system and the implementation system? So when there are new therapies, like how do we get them so-called more automatically into practice, and then actually have greater population health benefits so we can actually improve life expectancy and also improve the total value of care. And this highlights the trends pre-COVID. While there was a lot of attention around COVID, as I said, the non-communicable diseases has been growing over the last 30 years. And then one of the grave concerns, and this is why if we want to bend the curve for cardiovascular health, is that biotechnology and biopharma have actually been leaving the cardiovascular space. And so in 2000, the top 10 drugs that had indications, covered about 112 million patients in the US. In 2010, it was 62. In 2020, it was 18. And in 2030, it's not too hard to see that the math could be actually about 9. And so and while there are, in 2020, there is one drug, Eliquis, that's in the top 10 that has a broad cardiovascular indication for AFib. Others are really focusing on rare diseases or rarer diseases. And so, this is a big issue. And part of that is that it can take $2.5 billion to develop a drug for cardiovascular space. And so if you can make a choice of doing something for $250 million, it's pretty easy how capital could get allocated in a way that may not necessarily benefit public health. And so, for those reasons, we do have to do something better in terms of cardiovascular trials. Now, the other question is, have you or a family member participating in a clinical trial? And I'll say I just did this past few years. I was part of clinical research studies when I was a med student because I had to pay for lunch. So I underwent all sorts of procedures that I thought was helping humankind, but more importantly, I could get some revenue to pay for lunch. But at the time, and again, my motives were probably mixed. But during COVID, I did sign up for one of the vaccine studies. And I learned a lot through that experience. I learned some things from my parents who are actually part of research studies in the past. My father was interested in it because he was a retired nephrologist, but he actually liked the social experience. My mother just thought it would be good since she knew people in medicine and her doctor asked her to, but they had different ways that they would approach it. And so for my father, he really enjoyed the experience. He felt like he was actually making some grandiose contribution to humankind. My mother liked it for a little bit until they made her come in to go do visits. And so then she tried to stop. And so I had to convince her to continue on. And I'll share my experience here, which I'm sure there's no congestion in Houston anymore. But when I was part of the vaccine study, it was pretty easy because everything was fairly brief in terms of how you signed up, how you went in, got your vaccine, and everything was decentralized. And then they wanted to start bringing people back in so they get blood samples, et cetera. And so at first, where I was doing that was fairly close to my house. And then they moved the site for clinic visits out by the airport. And then my appointment was inconvenient because it was tied into traffic. And when I got there, I got lost. And then further, I answered questions that I'd already answered online. So I was actually getting duplicate questions. So those are the experiences that people remember and they carry forward to their friends. And so I shared this with my colleagues that were responsible for this and said, like, it seems like, we should just be doing something way different here if we want people to really participate and do it with their friends and family. And so, and that's why what explains, this equation that across different health systems and across different regions of the world, typically less than 2% of people who are eligible for studies participate. In part, they may not know about it. In part, our systems can be clunky. And in part, when they see what the experience is like, they may not necessarily see how that fits in with their daily life. But yet, when you ask them a survey, would they participate in clinical trials? That's over 85%. And so we have this chasm between those who actually participate and those who would like to. And then we also have this other chasm, which is we're often trying to generate, we're trying to deliver healthcare for the 85% or more with only using 2% of the people participating in studies. And so extrapolating things may be difficult. And then another thing that's come up is this idea, which is if we don't have a united system, we'll have opportunity costs with people joining small studies that may not deliver an answer. And so this is an example from COVID, where there are over 500,000 patients who signed up for studies, yet almost the vast majority weren't going to deliver any reasonable results. So only 26% were even possible if they fully enrolled. Turned out only 5% actually delivered any results that were meaningful. And so that's a problem that we have for opportunity costs. And this is my fancy artwork. I don't know, are people a fan of AI? I've never been an artist, but now with AI, I can be an artist. And so like during the summer, started experimenting with a program called Dolly. And it's an open AI platform, and you can type in a prompt. And so this is my prompt of what the clinical trial system looks like. Essentially, the Gordian knot of people contributing in a different way and then trying to unravel what they've done. And this is the issue, is that certainly the FDA has made things more complicated over time, in part trying to ensure there's rigorous evidence around what we do, but we've also contributed that in terms of healthcare systems and how we add layers and layers of things that may not be necessary. And so they're just examples for which, surprisingly, there may be a system out there that can do something more simply, but we wind up having 3 systems to do different parts of it and adding more layers to this. So there's a lot of effort to unwind the Gordian knot, and hopefully we can work together to do that. There are also some great concepts in terms of how do you reach people. So these are actually maps of healthcare, and you can see that it shows essentially where there are healthcare deserts. In terms of the darker blue dots are where there are healthcare deserts. And so like in Texas, you can see, those, obviously not anything here. And then also where populations live compared to hospital deserts. It turns out the same thing, or actually even worse, is true for clinical trials. So if you were to ask, and it's come up in different ways, how could I join a clinical trial? If you're not even close to a healthcare setting, that's really hard. If you're not even close to a high quality healthcare setting, then it's even harder. And there have been experiments that try to change this. people have noted that, well, like there's a CVS on every corner or a Walgreens or and so forth. That it's very convenient. They do so-called do healthcare because they sell drugs, and people go in there to buy things that are health related. However, it turns out while they are convenient, it's not the same as seeing your cardiologist here in a trusted way. So, another convenient place are gas stations. So it turns out gas stations actually map very conveniently, similar to CVS. They're on every corner. People have to go in there or go there. And, while like there's a lot happening around electric vehicles, still 95% of people have to go to a gas station every week or every other week, essentially. But you wouldn't go there, I think, for healthcare. So why would you think about going there for a clinical trial? And it turns out, the experiments so far, and there are a couple still playing out, CVS realized that it's pretty hard to do because the regulatory requirements are different. People going there for convenience, not necessarily for health care. And so it's even harder for a clinical trial. And in our own, we worked with all of them. Where we had success were post-vaccine studies where people were tied to getting the vaccine and joining a study very quickly. For any interventional trials, it just never materialized in any way. And then the other thing that, I think in this polarized climate that we live in is that, trust in science is a challenge. And it's actually not just the US, it turns out. Like around the world, there's a different trust in science. And so while this is a little bit older, it hasn't gotten any better. You can see here that for the US, only just under 40% trust science a lot, and then another 40 trust it some. And things are a bit worse. And it's also tied to political views. And again, I think it's not just a US issue that we have to address. So what are some practical approaches? I think, we've certainly, and this is from, kind of, I'll just say our growing up in a way at Duke with Rob Califf, being much more pragmatic in terms of clinical research. How can we fit into someone's life, a patient's life, a clinician's life? And so we do more and more employ a checklist in terms of thinking about designs of studies and recruitment, and also leveraging real world data. And while these principles may not really map to something that's an early phase study, there are elements that can, such as how you identify people and how you engage them, especially for something that may be cutting edge. And then, we're in this era where there's data everywhere. People actually don't know how to take advantage of it fully. And there are systems that are really thinking about, like, all the encounters that they have every day. How can they get it to a common language? And just because you have Epic, for instance, doesn't mean that's actually the common dialect that's going to be used for data that would be for a clinical trial. And so there are things that have to be done there, or mapping to these common data models. And so as we go forward, we're often thinking, whatever the clinical trial is, like, how do we try to take advantage of easy ways of what people are doing? And so the examples that we have, whether it's an acute MI trial or something that's more for primary prevention, is for each of these categories, like, how do we engage people so that they actually would want to join and think about it as like a good experience that's interesting for them and for others? How do we kind of are more seamless about ensuring that they're eligible? And then also actually getting to things that, instead of informed consents that are 20 plus pages or longer, to actually think about an engaged consent. It shouldn't necessarily be longer than what it takes to buy a house. And then also, how do we think about endpoints and safety? And there are now a world of possibilities. A silver lining around COVID is it forced us to think differently. Instead of having people come into hospitals all the time or clinics, we similarly have go to meet the patient. Now, I think just like healthcare is a human experience, clinical trials are also a human experience. And so people want to have that interaction. It's not just always going to be through a phone, but there's a lot of things that can be done more conveniently at home and in a way that is more patient centered. And so now we're seeing all that happening and also being able to link in data that hasn't been done before. And so we're actually in the process of launching a number of food as medicine trials, which actually will take advantage of platforms where people will go into grocery stores and sign up for a food as medicine or prescription trial, and then be able to connect their data to healthcare and other sources to understand, do those so-called prescriptions, if you will, have a health benefit. So going to share a couple of case examples coming from Duke. I should acknowledge that the so-called first really computerized textbook started with people coming through the cath lab every day in the late 1960s. Joe, I don't know if you know this, it can't be done today, but it was actually a grant from the chair of medicine, Gene Stead, that was intended to be used for some rat studies in MI. And he had some monies left over to get it started. And that's how the Duke Data Bank started. So actually, so-called back then, translational medicine is how I would call it, or translational research. And then doing large clinical trials, but then started taking advantage of real data as it's happening with patients walking through healthcare systems, things like by coordinates uniting healthcare systems to answer different questions through randomized trials. Just to show whether it's even possible, there was a study called Adaptable, just asking the question, what's the right dose for aspirin? And then also, could you actually take a pragmatic approach? And so this use health systems, 40 sites across the US to identify over 650,000 people who are eligible, and then approach 450,000 people to join a study. 31,000 touched the portal, and then 15,000 actually consented. And we had almost 50,000 virtual visits. And so at least the concepts exist that this is possible. And one of the best things here was actually an engaged community, that there were patient partners throughout the study end to end. And then also as we finished up the study, they actually presented the results. And so for those who follow Mike Gibson on social media, you noted this is the first time we've had a participant in a trial present the background for why the study was done and the primary results. And so it really helped us think about differently. And also, let's just say that they can be pretty vocal. And I remember one conversation with a patient on one of these panels was, it was like, why is the study, 15,000 patients? And so I thought like he was wanting to know, like, because I'm a cardiologist, clinical researcher, he wanted to understand the assumptions for the power calculation and stuff like that. So I walked through all that. And I'm like, no. Like, didn't you just say that cardiovascular disease is the #1 health problem? I was like, yeah. I was like, well, why is it only 15,000? Like, that seems really tiny. Why shouldn't it be like, 150,000? And so just asking the very obvious, or 1.5 million. It seems like, because it doesn't seem connected. So it's those kind of examples of people, raising these questions that make you really think. The other kind of concrete example is the informed consent process. And so I joke around sometimes that, IRBs are like incredible, like magnets for English majors. Somehow, like, they just attract people that can find like little words to change here and here that don't materially make things better, but do slow the process down. And then also just, how it looks like a legal document. So on the left is kind of our portal, the going through the steps of the study, while simultaneously obtaining informed consent. And so what we call an engaged consent. So I think there are a lot of things that we saw that were experiments that worked. Now, the one thing that I'll just be very clear that didn't work was that we placed a bet that, like, well, all the health insurance companies have everyone's data and they can like contact people. But it turns out the last thing that people responsive to is the health insurance. And so like, I'm sure, again, it's different down here because everything is that, people like automatically respond to health insurance plans, but at least across this setting of Adaptable, there was 133,000 people contacted, essentially 0.7%, and then we got it up to, or 185,000 people contacted, but less than 1% actually even touched the portal. And so while, and I hope I don't offend anyone who works in or has family and friends who work in the health insurance industry, their concept of that they are part of, they're delivering healthcare is just really foreign to actually the people who are getting the insurance. And this demonstrates that the engagement here is so slow. They often view it as, I think, a billing service as opposed to a healthcare. And so, it's just, and it's similar to what happened with CVS. More recently, we're in the middle of a next kind of pragmatic trial called Preventable. And this is around healthy aging, asking the question, does atorvastatin help people live longer without dementia or cardiovascular disease? And so the goal is going to be randomizing thousands of patients, similar fashion to Adaptable, leveraging PCORnet or healthcare systems associated with that and the VA. And it'll be a blinded trial. And so that's a step forward compared to Adaptable. And one of the things that happened here is that it was conveniently time to launch for enrollment in May of 2020, which also corresponds with one of the major surges at the beginning of COVID. So that's not the right time to launch a trial of older people who are afraid for their life and having any human contact. And so we had to do a lot of things to change things because while we had some things lined up for people going to homes to do enrollment and cognitive assessments, the last thing an 80-year-old wants is some stranger coming to the house when there's a pandemic that has no clear treatment back then. But we were able to manage successfully. And so we've been working through this. And so we identified over 1.5 million people who are eligible here across these different centers. And you can also fine tune in terms of how you reach out to different people based on some of the needs of the trial. And then we walk them through essentially these health systems through these kind of processes to kind of engineer it for what's going to be easy for the patient. And so along the way, we've changed things so we have more central contact for like doing cognitive assessments, for example. All the drug is actually delivered centrally to someone's home. So, they can come in, but most everyone elects to sign up and do things remotely. And we just had our investigator meeting this week where we celebrated enrolling over 6,000 people. And so and we're enrolling about 200 people a month. And, just to get perspectives for the number of sites we have, the normal cardiovascular trial would have about 100 people or less a month. And so, by designing things that meet the patient where they are, we think that we've met a great challenge. The only issue there is that, of course, the National Institute of Aging, thought we should do 2x of what we're doing now. But, since it's the largest trial now of healthy aging, we think we're pretty good. Another example is in the COVID era. This one's actually still ongoing. It's a platform study to address repurposed medications, or so medications already have an indication for something else and whether they can treat COVID. And the key questions are, can you help someone feel better faster or prevent hospitalizations or death? And so since it's a platform, we can have multiple arms going on. And then also we're taking advantage of both testing that happens in health systems as well as home testing. And so people can sign up or be identified either at home or through healthcare delivery. And then when we have multiple arms, we can actually establish that they may be eligible for one or more arm. And then also some patients may prefer to just have, or their docs may prefer to only be one part of one arm. And then we're able to collect baseline data directly and then have different ways of doing follow-up directly through their phone or web or a call center or sites. And so the reason I have N as X thousand is because we're not done yet. We've enrolled across all 50 states. And so that turns out to be important in the setting of a pandemic because you don't know where things are. We have 93 kind of brick sites. We've engaged over 26,000, approaching 30,000 through the portal. And then we've had almost 10,000 consent to at least one arm. And then those who were deemed eligible, we have almost 8,000. At our peak, we're enrolling about 400 a week. So we kind of follow the surges. And then just a couple of weeks ago, we opened up an arm for metformin, which actually probably has the most promising data for treating acute COVID and preventing long COVID, but hasn't really been validated in terms of a large-scale trial. And so this will do that one way or another. And I think the thing that we're most proud of is that we're able to do this across all 50 states. And so trying to cover the clinical trial deserts while also working with sites directly. So there's certainly a few things to do to untie the Gordian knot. There's a lot of activity, based on what's happened in COVID times in terms of how we can decentralize trials, not only in the US, but around the world. And so these are guidance draft documents that have been put out, and including the FDA's, which just came out recently for comment. And so we think there's going to be grand possibilities for decentralization of trials, not complete decentralized trials, but like taking hybrid models where it makes it easier for people to join and people to follow up. But critical things are needed for engagement of healthcare providers as a trusted partner. There are still all sorts of other issues that have to be sorted out. And so this is why I often say that certainly the FDA can help by providing better guidance on how to do things. But it's also sponsors, investigators, and healthcare systems that have to address the other issues. And so including like a common administrative model. So how can we actually get to a uniform approach so that it doesn't take months for people to get contracts, for instance, or a consent process. So a Duke, literally someone can be 11 miles away and have a different consent. Does that make sense? I don't think it does. And so how do you engage people as well more proactively, just like we're doing for healthcare? How can they be informed before they come in for their visit? How could they learn about something? And also, how could they actually know whether their data is being used and how it's being used? And then also, as we think about the different approaches of taking advantage of systems, what really becomes a site versus a system, and also how do we link all these data into ways that makes it good for all, but with permission and protecting privacy. So last few minutes, I'll just highlight one thing that's trying to do this in an area that we think is pretty exciting, but has many challenges. And this is around gene editing studies. And so we're launching an alliance called around precision health and around genetic medicine. And the story here is that if you start imagining what the possibilities for gene editing are, is that it can become more like molecular surgery. And so as they have platforms to doing different edits, then you start having a way where you can actually start doing more direct precision editing like molecular surgery. And so, the FDA is really interested in how this can happen. And so then you can start doing things like for rare diseases, but also for specific scenarios. And at the American Heart Association, there'll be an interesting presentation from one of the kind of leading biotechs in the area that's really trying to tackle atherosclerotic disease through different ways of gene editing. And but there's a lot of different questions around that. and in terms of how health systems will actually take advantage of genomic data. If you found someone that could be part of this, like, or even later be cured, should we, how would we approach them? ATTR amyloids, and another example of this. Will it create or help health disparities? How do you overcome mistrust, especially when people have had all sorts of stories about vaccines out in the social media? And then how can we actually make sure that we're including randomized trials as people think about this almost as if it's easy to understand a gene edit and not understanding that there's benefits and risk. So a lot of things happening here as this develops to bring people together, hopefully addressing research, healthcare delivery, as well as regulatory and payer aspects on this. So with that, I'll just end here. There's a lot of excitement around speed of science. We've learned, from some of these experiments and clinical trials that you can't just go to a 7-Eleven or a gas station. That it turns out people matter and healthcare matters. However, we do have to meet the real world, be convenient and be smart, and be trusted, through the channels that we work with. Otherwise, we won't be able to bend the curve if we don't get better evidence generation and clinical trials to the people where they're at. So thanks a lot. And here's a couple more pictures of back in the days. So thanks.